How does a Christian man deal with that?
Well, the very first thing is you're not called to be perfect at it, just like we're not called to be perfect in our relationship with Christ. I mean, all of us are not, we're not perfect people. If we
Amen.
were, there wouldn't be a problem.
Right.
you know,
We wouldn't need grace.
we wouldn't need grace. The fact that we're imperfect is why we need God's grace. And so leaning on it as something that you've got to gut through and you've got to be perfect at it. And well, since I can't do it right, I'm just not going to bother is kind of a cop out.
Welcome to the Valiant Forge podcast, where we help men overcome life's battles, show up better in the world, and become a valiant warrior for God. This is a place where we share practical strategies that will equip you on life's journey to help you become the man God has called you to be. Are you ready to overcome your doubt and fulfill your purpose just like Gideon? If so, let's go.
Welcome to the Valiant Forge podcast, where men come to get real, get rooted in the Word of God, and to grow stronger spiritually and emotionally. I'm Mark Osborne. I'm the host of the podcast. Today, I'm going to be sharing a conversation I had with Scott Maderer. He is a coach. He is a stewardship coach specifically. He helps people master their time, their talent, and their treasures so that they can live out their calling. We talk a lot about calling, purpose, passion. There's a lot of different terms around that, and we have a very great, deep conversation about it. And this honestly turned into a bit of a coaching session for me. There were a lot of things I took away from this entire conversation that I applied to my life directly afterwards. I went and took some notes and everything. So I think you're going to get a lot of value out of this conversation. If you're new to the podcast, welcome aboard. And if you like the show, please leave me a review. And if you're following on YouTube and you like the content, please subscribe. In the show notes below, I'm going to link a landing page that Scott made up for this particular podcast where you can connect with him, learn more about him, get his book. And, if you're interested in coaching or whatever, you can connect with him. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Scott Maderer. Scott, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thanks. I'm doing fantastic. Thanks so much for having me, Mark.
You're in Texas?
I'm in Central Texas. So in kind of the middle of the triangle between Dallas, Austin, and Houston. The city I live in is kind of in the middle there, a town called Bryan College Station.
Wow. So are you a Cowboys fan or Astros fan or what? They're Titans now, right?
I'm not actually a sports fan at
Oh,
all.
really?
I used to watch college ball, but I've never been a pro sports fan, and that's just never been someplace that I spend a lot of time watching sports. So I've been to a Cowboys game, I've been to an Oilers game back when they were here. I've been to professional baseball games, Astros, and various things, but it's just never been a big thing for me. So.
No, I'm a Chicago guy, so I've been a Bears fan and a Cubs fan, so I probably should not be a sports fan because
yeah.
I'm used to getting disappointed.
You're not a sports fan either. Okay.
Right, exactly. So tell the audience about yourself, who you are, what you do.
Sure, absolutely. So my job now and what I do now is I call myself a stewardship coach. So I'm a full-time coach. I've been doing that full-time since 2017. I started the business back in 2011 as a part-time business. I do that to help other Christians master their time, their talent, and their treasures so that they can live out their calling. And I know we're going to talk about some of those things today. Started life, I was actually going to go become a medical researcher. I did medical research for a little while, graduated with a couple of science degrees, did that.
Wow.
Figured out that medical research turns out that a lot of time and effort is spent just chasing grant money. Didn't really want to chase grant money. So I pivoted and I became a school teacher. I did that for 16 years. I taught public school, high school, middle school, everything in between. And did that, became involved in systemic reform and doing a lot of national projects with science education and things like that. Left that, went into the corporate world, did that for 11 years. We had a big team, 180 people, flew all around the country, spent a lot of time in airports and hotel rooms and
Wow.
talking to clients and doing all of that fun stuff, and worked myself up in kind of a senior position. And during all of that, my wife and I had gone through, it's my wife, myself, and now my adult son, at the time he was a youth, we went through a big financial crisis of our own, dealing with, it was while I was still teaching school, realized I had $70,000 worth of debt, was making about $40,000 a year.
Wow.
It went through a period where I was depressed about it. I was suicidal. My wife and I weren't talking. We were on our way to divorce. At some point, we had some things that turned me around. I also had a crisis of faith during that, and kind of returned to God and returned to the church as part of that journey. And all of that together, my wife and I just said, hey, we're just going to be weird. We're going to do things totally different than other people do. And as we did that and began paying off the debt, we paid off all of it in 2 years, 11 months. That's also in the middle of that, I had emergency surgery. I changed careers, all of these different changes. But people started coming to us and going, hey, y'all are weird. Can you help me be weird? And that's where the coaching was born, is, just out of people asking for help and us realizing, hey, we can help other people and turn that into a business. And so I've had a lot of different experiences and a lot of different work, but kind of had that climb up the corporate ladder to realize, hey, I don't want to be here, to climb back down again and go pivot and start my own business, my own thing.
So I like that you called yourself weird. What came to my mind when you said that is God says that his people are a peculiar people.
Yep.
And I think, that's how we're supposed to reach people, is by being different than the world.
So can you be in the world, but not of the world, right?
Right.
It's kind of, and that's what makes it weird, if that makes sense.
Can you explain you called it a faith crisis?
Sure.
So did you grow up in church? You knew about God when you were young?
I grew up in church. I actually felt a call to ministry. I'd actually applied to go to seminary in high, as I was graduating. And then, like a lot of folks, around the same time I was leaving to go to college and all of those things were going on, there were some things that happened, personal things with my family. My father's an alcoholic, and I was dealing with that, and he was abusive, and he went through some things, and my wife, my mother and him got a divorce, and all of that was going on. And because of the way the church was responding to things, and I felt about it, I had a crisis of faith and left the church, didn't believe in God anymore. As I tell people, I ran from God as hard, as fast as I could until God caught me, because it's, at some point, as I was going through that crisis of the soul, because I left the church for 30 plus years. I, as well as returning to doing things different from a financial perspective, from a relationship perspective, from a mindset perspective and behavior perspective, I also started going back to church with my wife, and as my pastor says, you're either in or you're out, because I went from not doing church to being involved with the Methodist Church at a what they call a conference level or state level, and doing training and teaching others how to do lay ministry, and going all around the state and preaching and doing a whole bunch of stuff. So it's kind of one of those, I'm either out or I'm in. I really don't do it halfway. But it came out of that period where I was suicidal, and my wife and I, part of us learning to communicate and coming and getting back on the same page was also getting back involved with the community of faith.
That's awesome. So was there like a moment that was, you said you were suicidal. Did you get witness to another person, or you just had this moment like it's either suicide or back to God?
It was the radio. That's what gave me the testimony. So what happened is I used to drive home from school pretty late at night down a winding road, and my suicidal thoughts was I was planning on driving. There was a really steep embankment that, in my mind, if I drove off of that, I would die, and it would look like an accident, and my wife would be okay because she'd get some insurance money, and that would take care of the debt, and she needed to take care of the debt. She really didn't need me. By the way, that's not a true statement, but that's what I was thinking at the time.
Right.
And I used to listen to talk radio, not because I actually cared about what was on the radio, but because hearing a person talk would help keep me awake. where if I listen to music, I would fall asleep. I know that's ironic. Here I am thinking about killing myself, but I'm also trying to stay awake. It's the irony of the way our brain works. Whenever we're suicidal, we aren't thinking intelligently or logically. We're thinking emotionally. And they changed the lineup on the radio and they put on the Dave Ramsey show. And, I don't agree with everything that Dave says or does, but at that point in time, I needed to hear that message. And what happened is God put it on the radio for me. And I started listening to it and I started arguing with this idiot on the radio that was talking about being debt free and all of this. And I realized on a Friday, they started the debt free screams. And I started hearing all of these people talking about being debt free. And I realized for 3 days in a row, rather than thinking about suicide, I was arguing with this person on the radio.
Wow.
And it made me realize that maybe I needed to stop and listen. And so the next week I kept listening to the show, and somebody on the show that second week said, they described a situation that wasn't identical to mine and my wife's, but it was very similar enough that I could hear myself in it. And he was talking about a crisis of faith and talking about being suicidal and, just all of these things. It was almost like you're checking down a list going, yep, I got that. And he talked about how he came clean to his wife and sat down with her and talked, and they turned it around and got on the same page. And now they were debt free. And so that weekend I went and sat down with my wife and I said, look, this is going to be crazy, but I've been listening to this guy on the radio. And she goes, oh, you mean Dave Ramsey? Turns out she was listening to it during the day. I'm listening to it at night during the rebroadcast. She'd literally been praying that maybe I would be here, that I'd hear the show and that this would, speak to me. Because even though I was shielding my wife and protecting her, and she didn't know anything that was going on, she knew everything that was going on. She knew exactly how much debt we had. She was just trying to protect me and not put any more stress on me, because she knew my wife's an empath. So she knew how I was feeling better than I knew how I was feeling,
right.
And so we're going through all of that. And basically that weekend we're like, okay, we're going to do it different. We're not going to do this anymore. We're going to change the way we're doing it. And basically at that time I made an average. So during the 2 years, 11 months that we paid off the debt, we averaged income of $52,500. So starting low, I ended higher, but that was the average. And we paid off $78,856.42. So, if you do the math on that, you realize the only way you pay that much money off in 2 years, 11 months is you don't spend any money on anything.
Right. Yeah.
So, date night was a bologna sandwich on the back of the trunk down by the lake. That was date like, it was as fancy as we got for a little while.
So being a men's coach and, going through that, you learned discipline. You weren't a men's coach at that point. Were you still a school teacher?
Nope. At that point, when I started the journey, we were a teacher. And when I ended the journey was at the beginning of the corporate
So did that stewardship of getting out of debt, did that start a journey towards discipline in other areas in your life?
Absolutely. One of the things that I've found now as a coach and found myself then is generally if you bring accountability and discipline to one area of your life, it just naturally starts to spill over into others. And the same thing happened to me because I was getting disciplined around my spiritual life. I was getting disciplined around my financial life. I started to exercise more and eat better. And, everything is connected because that's the way these keystone habits work. Things like health, things like money, things like time. They're what we call keystone habits because they spill out into other areas of your life just naturally. So I have clients now that I'll be working with. We're working together 3 or 4 or 5 months, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, why am I losing weight? And it's, we're working on money. Why am I losing weight? I haven't done anything different. It's like, yes, you have. You just don't even realize you have, because all of a sudden you're paying more attention to what you're doing around money, and it naturally makes you pay more attention to what you're doing around food and what you're doing around other things. It can't help but affect the other areas of your life.
Yeah. It's interesting when you start paying attention to things. I did a little bit of nutrition coaching probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and people would be like, yeah, well, and instead of taking away what I learned through nutrition coaching, because people see a diet like I got to eat less food. Instead of taking food away from them, I would add like eat more protein. And then automatically by eating more protein, they're eating less processed foods. And and I just learned, like, when you start paying attention, and I'm sure it's the same with finances.
Right.
I still struggle in the area of finances. I've recently been paying more attention through kind of the same thing. My journey started with fitness. I was 60 pounds overweight about 10 years ago, and then I started as this is how I ended up into self-development. I I call it Christ development because I don't like to term self, even though I know
Hmm.
you have to make the first step. In James, it says, draw near to me and I'll draw you near to you. You have
Right.
to make
Right.
the first
We
step.
we have to
So
make
I,
the choice. Yeah.
right, we have to make the choice. But just I realized how the journey of just becoming a better person starts with
Mhm.
just one action. So I
And it
go
comes
ahead.
with attention. You used that word earlier, attention. It's attention, intention, and attention. Both in and
Yeah.
at are both so important because it's when we sit down and we start aligning and becoming accountable to what do we pay attention to and what are our intentions with that thing. Budgets are the same way. You talked about adding things. I tell people because everyone always thinks about a budget and it's like, oh, that's the things I have to say no to. Time the same
Right.
way.
Right.
Everyone starts thinking about, oh, I'm so busy I can't do this thing that's important to me, and I'm like, turn it around. Instead of building a budget or looking at your time or your calendar as what do I have to say no to, look at what do I get to say yes to. Put in the most important things first.
Right.
So when my son was in band, once that band schedule came out, I knew when the football games were and I knew when they were performing. I went to my calendar and all of those days, that those days and times got blocked off. Those are now sacred. I'm going to go to my son's
Mm.
performance, and
Right.
and nobody gets to book time on that because that's mine. That's the most important thing because family is important to me. Those, when you realize that it's not about what you deprive yourself of, but it's about what you allow into your life, it changes the way
Correct.
you're thinking about it. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's because then the stuff that you're saying no to, it's kind of like, well, this is easy to say no to because it's not really that important anyway. It's the stuff at the
Yeah.
bottom of the list. So what the heck? I can just say no to that.
Yeah. I know you say that time management and money management are myths. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Well, here's what I mean by that. So, myth is a word that I use. Symptom is a word that I use. People think you have a problem with time. You said earlier when we were talking before we got started that oh, time is a problem for me. You just said, oh, I'm still working on my finances. Here's the interesting thing. What I've discovered over the years after working with now over 1,000 people in these areas is the symptom is your money or your time. The
Hmm.
actual problem and the actual solution is that talent component because it's you. It's not about how you manage time. I hate the word time management because we don't manage time. It's about self. It's about how we manage ourself. It's about what we do and how we think and what we pay attention to and what we have intentionality about. And so at the end of the day, time and money are the symptom, but they're not actually the problem. The
Okay.
problem is your mindset, your behavior, how you act, what you do, the choices you make, what you pay attention to, all of those things. And, in some ways, that's one of those things where I say that and it's like, well, that's bad news, but it's also good news because the one thing in the world that you have any sort of control over is you.
Is you.
you,
Yeah.
you have zero control over the other people. You don't get to control politics or this or that or the other thing, but you can, to a very large extent, learn and manage to control yourself and your own decisions and your own behavior.
Yeah. So you use the word talent. So, and I'm just using an example as,
Mhm.
and I've used this excuse in the past. When it comes to money management, my wife handles it because I feel like I don't have the talent to manage money.
I'm not
So,
good at it, right?
right, yeah. So
Mhm.
how does a Christian man deal with that?
Well, the very first thing is you're not called to be perfect at it, just like we're not called to be perfect in our relationship with Christ. I mean, all of us we're not perfect people. If we
No.
were, there wouldn't be a problem.
Right.
you know,
We wouldn't need grace.
we wouldn't need grace. The fact that we're imperfect is why we need God's grace. And so leaning on it as something that you've got to gut through and you've got to be perfect at it. And well, since I can't do it right, I'm just not going to bother, is kind of a cop out. I mean, translate that to your Christian walk. Well, I fell off the wagon and I stumbled and I sinned, so I might as well not bother.
Wow.
No, that's not how we do that. Or, you know what? My gifting is not really in treating other people with care and kindness and love. I know that's what Christ calls us to do, but I don't really have that in me. So I'm going to be angry and bitter and hateful to everybody. Really?
Wow.
That's not allowed. So it isn't that it has to be your gifting. And it's not that you have, by the way, if your wife is gifted in that way, there's going to be parts of money management where you absolutely lean on her giftings and her ability to do that. But that doesn't excuse you from knowing what's going on, from being somebody that helps her and makes decisions with her and walks with her. That doesn't absolve you from any responsibility, because otherwise what usually ends up happening in relationships is one person's over here trying to take control of everything and the other person's over there messing everything up. Not because they're mean, but because they don't even know what's going on. And so they're messing it up because they're not on the same page. They're not communicating. They're not paying attention to the same things. So a lot of times when I work with couples, one of the biggest reasons we do things like spending plans and budgets and stuff like that is it's a tool for communication. It's so that people can sit down together and go, hey, this is how much we've got, this is what's important to us. How are we going to distribute this? And again, money, time, same concept. You've got a finite amount. No matter how much money you make, you've got a finite amount. You've only got so much, and you've got an infinite amount of things you can do with it. So you can never possibly do everything, but usually we have enough to do anything. We just don't have enough to do everything. So that's then when you have to begin to have a discussion and be an adult and actually defer gratification and, look at each other and go, well, that's more important to us than that. So we're going to do this, and that's the people that, I'll use something like private school. Putting your kids in private school is important to you. Okay, great. You can do that, but you're probably then going to have to make up and give up some things that maybe your friends and other people are doing because you don't have the resources to do that and private school.
Right.
And that's not because private school is the right thing to do, but if for your family, that's the right thing to do, then you would make that sacrifice. If on the other hand, your neighbor, that's not the right thing, they do a different thing and it's okay. But instead, what we do is compare ourselves to everyone else. We have that keep up with the Joneses mentality,
right. Yep.
And compare everyone. Oh, I deserve it. I work hard. I deserve to go out to eat. I'm tired. All of the different excuses that we make, and they're really a cop-out. Again, I like to translate those same excuses and say, what would happen if you use those same excuses in your spiritual walk? For people of faith, translate it to your spiritual walk and go, I'm too tired to read my Bible today. I'm too tired to do my spiritual disciplines today. That may be true from time to time, but if you do that every day, then are you really committing to doing that activity? Is it really important for you?
Right. To be honest, I think that a lot of us, like I said, for 40, I think I told you it before we recorded, for 40 years, I was a man who went to church and I would read my Bible inconsistently here and there. If I had a message to prepare for, then it was like I was cramming to try to get a study done until I finally had that, like you had. I call it a God nudge, where God's like, I'm nudging you because it's time for you to step up. And I like you where you said earlier, it's, be an adult. Because I believe, and you could tell me if you coach a lot of men, I believe there's an epidemic of immaturity in the world today. And how do we get men to stop being so immature and to start being adults?
Well, and I think what it is a lot of it is the messaging and the culture that we get from, and it's, by the way, it's not just men, but we'll stick with men, where we're told things like, again, those same messages that I just said, you deserve it. I mean, think about it. That's how things are marketed to us.
Yeah.
Plus everything is sold to you with the idea that, hey, if you buy this, spend this, go on this vacation, get this car, whatever it is, now you're going to be successful. Really? It's a form of idolatry. It's a form of pride.
Yep.
It's a form of it's those are blocks. Those are sins, things that cause us to miss the mark. That's all really the word sin means, is missing the mark. And it means that there's things that draw our eyes off of what we're supposed to have our eyes on. We get distracted. We start paying attention to the wrong stuff. It's why, if you get your mind right, your soul right, your vision right, I could make $20,000 a year. I could make $2,000 a year. I could make $200,000 a year. And my level of contentment is the same.
Correct.
Because my contentment, my security is not based on the money I make. When I was suicidal, it's because in my mind, success and how I was performing as a man was directly tied to how good of a money provider I was. Right. If I wasn't making enough money, I'm not a good enough man. That's bull. Okay.
Correct,
You want to know, now when I look at things like legacy and I think about, I want the fact that my son can say that, when I pass away, my son can say, my dad said, I love you, son, to me every single day of my life. That's important. I didn't take money. No. I could make $4 and I could do that, as long as I'm walking this earth, I could do that.
Right.
And so I've made a point of doing that because the household I grew up in, that didn't happen, So it's like literally a conscious decision of, nope, every day my son's hearing that from me. And he lives in Dallas now, and I text him every morning. Hey, love you, son, and call him sometimes, text him every day if I'm not calling him.
That's awesome. So providing value is better than having value, is how
Absolutely.
I would say it. Yeah. So
and what's cool is when you provide value, value naturally comes back to you because you get influence.
Right.
People suddenly start looking at you as, hey, I value you because you provide value, naturally.
Yeah, that's reaping and sowing. Mm-hmm. So you got a book coming out. You want to tell us about the book?
Yeah, the book actually came out last year, so it's right here behind me in blue. It's The Inspired Living, and the subtitle is Assembling the Puzzle of Your Calling by Mastering Your Time, Your Talent, and Your Treasures. It's really exactly what we've been talking about. It kind of goes through each of those components of time, talent, and treasures, gives some actionable tips, things that you can do, walks you through sort of the mindset and the frameworks that I use so that despite the specifics of your situation, it helps reframe how you think about those resources so that you begin to develop a stewardship mindset and begin to look at how can I use these resources for not just the betterment of me and my family and those people around me, but also just for the world as a whole through developing influence and making an impact. And, that looks different for every person. So I tried really hard to make the frameworks in the book things that would apply, whether you make $30,000 a year or $300,000 a year, the mindsets that are in there and the frameworks that are in there could help you reset how you look at time and money and how you look at your calling, so that the reason why I wrote it is I want more people doing what God put them on the earth to do, because I think if all of us were doing that, the world would be a much better place.
Yeah. So how does someone figure out what their specific calling is?
So let me clarify a couple of things, because I think there's a lot of confusion around calling. So for me, and this is kind of my definition, a lot of times we hear the word calling and people think immediately to what's my job? What do I get paid to do?
Passion, pursue, yeah.
And then the other way, exactly, is people will hear calling and they think, what's my passion? It's not exactly what I mean by calling. So let's start with job. Career is the word that we use and should use for the thing we get paid to do. Okay.
Correct.
That word, actually, the root word for it comes from cart. So a career is like a cart. It's something that gets you from point A to point B. The particular job you have, the particular role you have, by the way, even if it's a not paid role, it's still your career. So your role as a father, your role as a husband, these are all things that you do. They're activities that you take on. Your calling, on the other hand, is the purpose behind those activities. It's the thread that weaves through everything in your life. that's why passion is a little better than career or job, but even passion doesn't fully capture it, because your purpose, passion is part of your purpose, but it's not all of your purpose,
Right.
because your purpose also involves, by the way, sometimes things that aren't necessarily your gifting or your strength or your identical, the passion thing that you always love to do. It also can overlap into things that are a little uncomfortable and are maybe stretching you. It also pushes you to do things that you can't do on your own, in part because that causes us to depend on other people and depend on God.
Right.
If it's all within our power, well, we don't need anybody else. We don't need God. We don't need anybody else. It's us. We're good. But that's not what we're called to do. And so our passion a lot of times is almost too small for calling, because it can sometimes, there's times that, well, you talked about it earlier with me. You started a podcast. You've gotten involved in men's ministry. Neither one of those are things that you thought was your passion or your calling or what you were supposed to be doing. Yeah. Or it's not my giftings. It doesn't come easy to me.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're not called to do it, because calling
Amen.
is deeper and bigger and harder than just what comes easy or what feels good. It's more your purpose or your drive, how you were designed. Now, I do think for the most part, we are called to use our gifts and the things that are our strengths, a lot. Okay. But again, around the edges of that, oftentimes we're called to take that gift and go further, or go, make it bigger, or make it more impactful in a way, or do something with it that at first glance, when somebody looks at you and says, hey, I want you to go start this program over there, you're like, I can't possibly do that. That's way too big for me. Yeah, that might be exactly what you're supposed to do then, because it stretches you and drives you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I've told people, if it's going to help other people, then try it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Because your gift, the gifts, the talents, and gifts that God has given you is not for you. It's for the world. It's to reach the world. So,
and what's interesting about it is a lot of times the things that we're actually really gifted in are almost invisible to us.
Yeah.
They're the things that come so easy to us that we're like, oh, everyone can do this. No, they can't. And there's somebody else that's looking at you going, I can't believe that comes so easy to you. That's hard for me, and yet it comes easy for you. So it's not necessarily things that you think of either. They're often things that are invisible to you. You asked earlier about how somebody can begin to identify it. And I've kind of got two activities that I'll share with your listeners. This is something they could do, literally get off this call and you could do it. And so one of them is a looking backwards activity, and the other one's a looking forward activity. So we'll do the looking backwards first. It's really simple. Just take out a couple of sheets of paper, draw them line, put 3 columns, left-hand column, middle column, right-hand column. Down the left-hand column, just begin to brainstorm everything you've done in your life. And again, like earlier, don't limit this to just jobs. This isn't about career. This is about things that you've done, roles that you've had, activities that you've done, places you've been. Just be as broad as you can to put down on paper as many different things that you've participated in throughout your life.
Okay.
Keep writing. Then down the middle column, as you go back to those activities, write down things about that activity that you loved, things that you enjoyed, things that gave you energy, things that brought you joy. And by the way, you're not allowed to leave this column blank for anything. Even that job you hated that you could not wait to quit, you got to come up with something about that job that was the thing that gave you energy. Okay. Because there's always something. There's always some silver lining to every storm cloud. So find it, dig for it. And then in the last column, here's where you write down for that same activity, what are things that you didn't enjoy? What are things that didn't give you joy? What are the things you hated, if you want to use that word, but the things that pulled energy from you? Do this. And this is one of those activities that I would spend some time on. It's a good to do and then come back to and write some more and do it again. And, kind of spend a week or two with it and really marinate in it. And then go back and start looking for patterns. looking for things that keep showing up. And you may use different words and you may describe it differently, but if you start thinking about it, you'll notice that, hey, in that job, I talked about this, and in this, thing, I talked about that, but those are really kind of the same thing. I'm just describing them differently. You start looking for the things that you have in common down the love column, and look for things that you have in common down the don't love column, and begin to look for the patterns. And what you'll discover is there will be a pattern. There will be things that bubble up that you'll start to notice. And that kind of gives you some grounding in what you've actually been designed to do, because the things that give you joy and feed you energy, even the things that are difficult and hard and, maybe didn't go perfectly and all of that, but they still fed you. You still kind of got out of it going, man, this was hard, but boy, was that awesome. Those are the things that I'm looking for. And those kind of begin to give you a direction of your calling. And by the same token, if you look at the things that took energy from you and then kind of flip them on their head, and go, what's the opposite of that? Often that will be towards your calling as well. So either one of those columns can give you direction. Wow. And then the future activity, the looking forward activity, is really important, because you can begin to make changes off of the first activity that I just gave you. But a lot of times they're kind of hit or miss. You kind of aren't going in any general direction. So the forward-looking activity, I said it in an airport, because when I worked corporate, I was always in an airport. And so I got to make this story in an airport. Imagine it's 5 years in the future. So it's 5 years from today. You're flying home from a vacation. And you know how sometimes when you fly home, you got that airport in the middle where you land and then you change planes and then you fly the rest of the way. You got the layover, right? And as you're running to your gate, getting ready to board the plane to get the rest of the way home, you get up to the gate and there's those dreaded words, flight delayed. It turns out that your connecting flight is delayed. You went from having a 30-minute layover to having a 4-hour layover in this airport in the middle of nowhere, right? And you're stuck in the halfway point. They call it a liminal space. It's in between. You can't do anything. So you do what anyone does when they're stuck in an airport for 3 or 4 hours. Depending on your particular preference, you either go find a bar or a restaurant. You're either going to go have a drink or you can go grab something to eat. That's what everybody does. And so I'm going to pick a restaurant because I'm a teetotaler. But as you walk into the restaurant, all of a sudden from across the room, somebody pops up and they're like, "Hey, Mark, it's so great to see you." It turns out it's a friend. Somebody that you were really close with, but you've lost touch over the years. You haven't seen him for 4 or 5 years. You've talked to him a couple of times, but y'all really haven't been keeping up. And here it is 5 years in the future. They happen to be in this airport. What are the odds? So great. Y'all walk over, you talk to each other, you give each other a hug. They say, "Hey, are you going to be here for long?" You say, "Well, I got a 4-hour layover. Wasn't planning on it, but now I do." They're like, "Hey, I'm stuck in the airport too. I've got a 3-hour layover. Let's grab a corner booth and catch up." You go sit in the corner. And your friend looks across the table at you and goes, "Mark, it is so great to see you. I haven't seen you in so long. Man, you look awesome. How has life been treating you these last 5 years?" And you look at your friend and you look him in the eye and you go, "You know what? The last 5 years have been the best 5 years of my life because."
Wow.
That's the point of the activity. Tell me what comes after the word "because." Tell me what's true about your finances. Tell me what's true about your career. Tell me what's true about your relationships, your spiritual walk, all of the different parts of your life. Be as detailed and descriptive as you can. This is one, especially for us guys, a lot of times it's easier to talk it. So go turn on the turn on the app on your phone and just go for a walk and just talk, and just blur, throw it out, put it out there. Just babble, okay, and talk about what would it look like. What would your family situation be? Where would you be living? What would you be doing? How would things be, and how would you feel about it if those things were that way? Because here's what's interesting: between the going back and looking back activity and the forward looking activity, you now kind of know, hey, this is where I'm aiming, and this is what I have to build from. This is the foundation, and this is the target. And then step back and go, okay, what's one action or one tiny step that I can take that would move me from where I'm at, the foundation, towards where I want to go, that dream picture that you have? Give you a couple of caveats. Number one, notice I didn't say figure out the whole path and plan. I said take one action. Yeah. Do not get stuck trying to figure out the whole path, because you never will, and you'll never get started. Instead, just focus on what's the next tiny step that I can take. Number two, that destination that you have in mind is going to change It will move. I guarantee you it will not look like you think it's going to look. It will be different. But different, don't hear different and think, oh, well, that means I failed or that's bad. Different just means different because it's a journey. It's not a roadmap. It's meandering. Your life is a film strip, not a photograph. Yep. No matter where you are, your life always changes. And so that destination is going to move. That's okay. But it gives you a direction to head so that then as it shifts with intention instead of just random.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was young and I first got married, I had a 5-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
And
did you accomplish it in those 5 years?
No, I wasn't anywhere close.
But did you move further by having it than you probably would have without it?
Yeah. I mean, but I strayed away from the plan quite a lot because I was very young. But, as I love that exercise because something that, I've talked about on this podcast many times is self-awareness. Know thyself. And just that exercise, it's bringing awareness to who you really are. So I love that.
Absolutely.
There's a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I noticed in your bio that and it's weird because 58 years of living, I have never heard of the DISC personality test.
Okay.
And is that a DISC I see on the bookshelf behind you?
The green, red, yellow, and blue right here is a DISC graph.
Yeah. And a friend of mine just mentioned it to me just the other day. He's like, you should take this. It'll help you in your podcast interviews.
Yep.
And then I saw it in your bio. I'm like, this is so weird. Like it's just popping up after 58 years.
The reason I love DISC is not because it's the best personality assessment out there, and not because it's the only one. There's Enneagram, there's Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
There's thousands of them out there, and they're all good. Because again, self-awareness, right? They're a tool for self-awareness and they're a tool for other awareness. The reason I love DISC is because it's actually really easy and you can wrap your head around it and keep it in your head. And therefore I can use it in the real world. Myers-Briggs is like there's 6 letters and, all of these different combinations. And it's like, I'm sorry. I'm not smart enough to keep all of that in my head. I just can't do it. But DISC, it's really based off of 2 characteristics. So here, play along with me. So the first characteristic is this. A gentleman by the name of Marsden came up with this back in the 60s. There were all these people studying abnormal psychology, and he got this weird idea that he wanted to go study normal people. So he's like, I want to study normal people. And so the first characteristic he came up with is he said, you know what? It turns out that in his study, he found some people identified themselves as more outgoing and some people identified themselves as more reserved. Now, let me be clear. Outgoing and reserved does not mean extrovert and introvert. That's usually what people hear in their head when I say outgoing and reserved. Yeah. Instead, think outgoing and reserved is how your internal motor runs. So an outgoing person sounds like this. An outgoing person is going to talk fast. They're going to move their hands when they do it. They're going to be go, 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 go. They get up in the morning, they hit the ground running. They go until their head hits the pillow at the next night. Man, they're going the next day. It's all about results and getting things done and, fun and energy. And you will know when you are around an outgoing person. Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's what they sound like and that's what they feel like. On the other end is reserved. So reserved people are a little calmer. They're a little quieter. They move a little slower. They think a little longer. They take a little longer to make decisions. They're much more interested in things like stability and safety and perfection and rightness and fairness and these sorts of things. They're not about getting it done and having fun. They're more about, everything's okay. It's kind of calm here. So that's reserved. So play along. For you, would you consider yourself more outgoing or more reserved?
More reserved.
Okay. And I would have guessed that based on our interactions so far.
And I would guess you're more outgoing.
Believe it or not, I split the line, and I'll tell you what that means in a minute. So I have an outgoing characteristic and I also have a reserved characteristic, which is one of the reasons I can flip between the two. But now there's another axis. So that's the up and down axis. Outgoing at the top, reserved at the bottom. On the left and right axis, we're going to go to the left-hand side, okay? And that's called task-oriented. The other side is called people-oriented. So task-oriented are folks that when you give them something to do, they start thinking about what it is that they need to get done. They're thinking about the what. Okay. Oftentimes they'll keep a list, they'll check things off. They're interested in results. They're interested in perfection. They're interested in getting things done and making sure that the what is taken care of. Okay. On the other hand, people oriented are often interested in the who. So they're thinking about who do they need. If you give them a task, they're in their head, they're trying to assemble a team. They're thinking about whose strengths is this? Who can I assign this to? They're thinking about what's fair? How do we make sure everyone's taken care of? They also, a lot of times, are thinking about fun and energy and how can we, make sure everyone enjoys this process and takes, we take care of everyone along the way. So for you, would you consider yourself more task oriented or people oriented?
Task oriented.
Okay. So you are reserved and task oriented. So you're going to be the lower left-hand quadrant of the circle. We go upper left, upper right, down, and then over. We're going to kind of go clockwise and spell DISC. So let me start in the upper left. I'll get to yours last. So the D's, are outgoing, task-oriented people. These are the go-getters. These are get things done. Lead, follow, or get out of my way. They're all about results, They measure everything based on the bottom line. Let's get it done. That's about 10% of the population. There's probably a reason for that. We call them dominant or drivers. The reason the D's, there's probably only about 10% is because if there were like 90% of the people were wired this way, we'd kill each other. We don't need a ton of them. We just need some. Right. Then we go to the right. So this is going to be outgoing and people. That's the I's. These are called the inspirational people or inspiring folks. These folks are all about fun. They're about energy. These are the folks that if you're in an event and they get up on the stage and they go, hey, we need somebody to volunteer, they're already in line. They don't even finish what they need to volunteer for. They're like, let's go. I'm up on the stage. I'm ready to go. They enjoy energy. They enjoy fun. They enjoy talking. They enjoy interacting. That's kind of their personality. And that's somewhere between 20 to 25% of the people are that. Okay. Kind of going around. Now we're going to go to the bottom right. So these folks are going to be reserved and they're going to be people oriented. These are the nicest people on the planet. They're called supporters. That's what the S stands for. These folks are about fairness. They're about status quo. They don't like conflict. They want to make sure everyone is taken care of. They will give you the shirt off of their back. They are some of the nicest people on the planet. And by the way, that's the most common group. That's somewhere between 30 and 40% of the population is in that category. Wow. So if you have to guess, start with an S because it's probably, if you run into someone at random, I'm going to start on the right side, people, and move to the task side if I'm just talking to you because there's more people-oriented people than there is task-oriented people. The last category, the C, you identified yourself as that one. That's the cautious type. These folks, their love language is getting it right. They want to know that everything is perfect. If I give them a list, they love it. They want an SOP. They want an explanation. They want to know, why am I doing this? Not just what am I doing, but what's the why behind it? They want to understand it. They're going to ask you 242 questions, before they do the activity.
That sounds very accurate.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Yes.
Now, if you had to pick one of the other three, which one of the other three sounded the most like you other than the C? If you had to pick one more.
The S.
Yes. Okay. So you're going to point this way across there. So you'll notice both of those traits are reserved. So for you to be outgoing is hard. You have to put a lot of energy into going that direction. You got to force it kind of, You got to work at it. But for you to stay on the reserve.
That's why I'm a podcaster.
They're both on the bottom. So that's easy. Yeah. But it does mean that you can bridge the gap between task and people because you go across the line left to right. So you can put yourself in a fairness mode. And you probably do think about who's involved and whether they're taken care of and those sorts of things. That comes more naturally to you because those are both of your traits. See, I'm actually a DC. So I'm up and down the left-hand side. So people is hard for me. I can do it. I just got to work at it. But outgoing and reserved, I can switch between those without any problem, because I have both characteristics. And I've learned over time how to do the people stuff too, but it's something that I've had to learn and I've had to engage in. And here's what's funny. I turned doing people stuff into a task. I literally create a task out of it because task is my natural wiring. So as an example, when I was in corporate, I figured out who my S's were that were on my team. I put a little event on my calendar, and on Wednesday it would pop up and it would say, hey, go visit these 3 people. And there were 3 of my S's on my team. And then the next Wednesday, a different 3 people. And the next Wednesday, a different 3 people. And I kept doing that until I'd gone and visited every single one of my S's. And then it started over again. So once a week for 1 hour, I got up and I went to go visit my S's, and I kept a notebook and I wrote down things like their kids' names and what their kids were doing. And so I'd walk up and I'd be like, hey, Mark, last week you mentioned your kids had a soccer game. How'd it turn out? How'd they do? By the way, they knew it was a task on my calendar. They knew what day was their day. They looked forward to it. They knew I was keeping notes in a notebook. Wow. It didn't matter because to them, think of what happens. I'm talking their language. That was the stuff they needed. They wanted to be taken care of. They wanted to feel needed. They wanted to have those conversations. They knew it didn't come naturally to me. So you do think it meant something to them that I was going out of my way to do something that spoke to them? You'll notice, by the way, I didn't say I went and visited my eyes. I just said I visited my S's. You know why? My eyes would come in my office. I didn't have to go visit them. They came to me. Okay. Wow. They would just show up. And I had to teach them, if my door is open, come in. If my door is closed, unless something's on fire, don't interrupt me because I'm doing deep work. I'm doing something that I need focus. But man, with my door was open, every day, one of the eyes would stop by. Hey, got a few minutes? Absolutely. And we'd chit chat about whatever, and they got their energy and then off they would go to go do their work. And guess what? My team, one of the highest performing teams in the company. That's awesome. And my D's, I just told them, hey guys, this is what you need to get done. Go take care of it. Let me know if you need help. That's all they needed. My C's, okay, guys, here's the SOP. I need y'all to check through it. Make sure we haven't missed any steps. If y'all are the first people to go through this, we haven't tested it yet. It's up to you to make sure it's right. Okay. I need y'all to go bug test this and break it, fix it. Tell me what's wrong. They loved that. They're like, awesome. Right. Because they want everything to be right. So I literally just gave them their love language. I'm like, here, go do that. Go make sure this is right for everybody. And so you learned how to use your team, not in a manipulative way, but in a way that let them each live to their strengths and their calling and what they were designed to do. Man, they loved that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for going over that. So the fact that I've lived 58 years and never heard of it, and one of my best friends mentioned it to me 2 days ago, and now you just described it to me, I'm taking this as a God nudge. So I need to.
Well, if you want a disc assessment, I'll give you my email at the end, and I'll shoot you one that you can take.
For sure. So there's a question I ask every man that comes on this podcast. It's around the cave of Adullam. David was running away from Saul in the cave of Adullam. He had 450 or so men, disgruntled, discouraged, discontented, didn't know what to do next with their life. David said something to them in that cave. It doesn't exactly tell us in the Bible what he said to them. Some people have said that if you read Psalms 34, it's likely what David said to these men. Mm-hmm. But after David became king, these men became David's mighty men. So modern day, you have a group of 450 men who are disgruntled, discouraged, don't know what to do next with their life. How would you inspire them to do what to do next?
What I would literally try to do is get to know each and every one of them on a one-to-one individual level. Exactly kind of what I was just talking about with DISC. How are they wired? And I know with 480 people were like, wait, you'd really? Yep. I'd spend enough time to go talk to every single one of them before I tried to talk to the group. Because the first thing I need to know is who's there. What are they feeling? Why are they discouraged? Are they all coming from the same place? Are they all, because they're not all going to be feeling the same thing. They're not all going to be coming from the same place. And then I could start pulling them together towards, okay, what is important to us as a community? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? And begin to paint a picture of how do we get there? It's really the same activities that I was just talking about on an individual level. but it's spelled out over a group, because I don't believe in leadership and influence comes from standing in the front and making the inspirational speech. For me, good leadership is about working the group into a unified whole. And unified, to be clear, doesn't mean uniform. It doesn't mean everyone's the same. That's what uniformity means. Unity means we've got the same direction, but not that we're the same people. Okay. Right. And because of that, you can get people to be stronger, because diversity is actually strength. Amen. Differences are strengths, but we look at them as weaknesses because we want everyone to look like us, act like us, believe like us, do everything like us. If they look like us, they're safe. If they think like us, they're safe. And I think God challenges us to look at differences and go, you know what? Amen. You're different. I love you anyway. Yeah. You're still God-given and you're still God-blessed. And that's Amen. What I talk to him about is, we can do anything, but our first step is to figure out what is it that we want to do? What is God sending us on? What's our mission? What's God sending us to do? Once we know that, the rest of it's easy.
Yeah. Paul talks about the body of Christ. We're a body. If we were all two left feet, we would get nowhere. Yep. We need a right foot. We need a left foot. We need a right hand. We need the whole body. We're all in different parts. Yeah.
You were talking about it with your spouse. She's different than you. And I have people that are like, I want to find somebody that's just like me. And I'm like, why? Because then one of you is not needed. Right. If there's two identical people, we don't need both of you. We can do with one of you,
Right. Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. It's like, that's why opposites attract, because God wants us to complete ourselves with people that aren't like us, not people that are identical to us. That's how we're called to do.
Amen. Well, this has been an enjoyable conversation. So where can people find your book? Are you on any social media or anything like that?
Absolutely. So I've actually put together a landing page just for your listeners. They can find all of that there, social media, book, all of that. So if you go over to my website, which is at inspiredstewardship.com, and then just put in /Forge, Forge, just like the podcast. What you'll find there is there's some free resources that folks can get, including those exercises I just gave you that we ran through real quick on the looking forward and looking. There's a place you can get those by signing up for Talent freebie. There's some things on time, some things on money if you need help in those areas. My podcast is listed there. My book is listed there, all of that. And again, you can find that over at inspiredstewardship.com /Forge.
Awesome. Scott, thanks for coming on. It was a pleasure having you.
Absolutely.
You mind if we say a quick prayer before we end?
No, absolutely.
Jesus, thank you for your love, your grace, and your mercy, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us together and sharpening us, Lord. I pray, Lord, that you continue to help Scott to help other men and to help himself. I could pray for his family, Lord. I pray for strength and encouragement in everything that they do. And I just pray for Scott's business. I pray, Lord, that it expands at the kingdom in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
All right, Scott, God bless you.